Today we have the honor of a lecture and questioning period by Ram Manohar Lohia, who will discuss contemporary Indian politics. Mr. Lohia is eminently qualified to speak on this subject. He has been active in Indian politics over the past many decades, being one of the leaders in India's independence movement, and following independence in 1947, an active figure in the Indian Socialist Party, of which he was a founder, and at present he is serving as a member of India's Parliament. He will speak for 35 or 40 minutes on contemporary Indian politics, at the end of which he will welcome questions from the floor. Dr. Lohia.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I am grateful to you for this opportunity, particularly on the 1st of May, which is probably a coincidence. The 1st of May, as most of you know, is celebrated all the world over by the working classes, both communist and anti-communist. Just at this moment, Soviet Russia is celebrating this day with armed might, while anti-communist working classes in the city of Berlin, as elsewhere, West Berlin I mean, are celebrating it with unarmed processions. Would it astonish you to learn that the original impulse of this day came from the United States of America? The city of Chicago, where the Haymarket incident took place. I shall say nothing more about it except to draw your attention to the great fight of America's working classes for the 8-hour day and the ringing declarations that were then made about how the robbed classes, that is the phrase used, normally one calls them the exploited or the oppressed classes, but at that time your leaders, some of your leaders used the phrase robbed classes. The emancipation of the robbed classes, as it was evidenced on the 1st of May and subsequent days, was it 1885 or 86 or 87, somewhere around that, a day which has resulted in celebrations such as those of Soviet Russia or the city of Berlin. These are the curious ironies of history. And if I speak to you on India's politics today, there might be similar curious relations with American politics as well. And I would not confine myself merely to Indian politics, but to give you a background of what is happening in India as in several other countries of Asia and Africa. I would refer to a controversy that took place recently, which echoed throughout the country and went into the farthest villages. I stated that over 270 million of my countrymen lived on 4 cents a day, each on 4 cents. That appears to be fantastic. Most people would think that it is impossible to live on that small sum. Some members of Parliament thought so too, and they shouted. That was fantastic. How could anybody live on that sum? To which I could easily answer back, why do you imagine that they do? 4 cents a day. India's Prime Minister answered that that was not true. They lived on 20 cents a day. His crass ignorance could not be upheld even by his own ministers, and his planning minister subsequently corrected his statement to 10 cents a day. It was not very difficult for me to prove to the House, we call it the House of the People in India, that the planning minister was guilty of several double entries, a crime for which a businessman can be easily sent to jail. This is the general background of poverty in which politics of my country, as well as all Asia and Africa, operate. I might also say something about the rate of growth. For some might be tempted to assert that while the present position is bleak, efforts at planning and improvement are changing the situation. If statistical percentages alone were to be taken into account, both India and America are expanding at the same rate of growth, anywhere between 2 and 3% annually. But when you work out these percentages into concrete figures, the 2% of America, or shall I say 3%, because it varies between the two figures, the annual rate of growth in America works out to about $95 per person. In India, to $1.50. So that with all the planning that we are engaged in, it would take about 100 years to reach up to your present standard of living. Provided, of course, in the meanwhile, you are courteous enough to stop where you are. Which makes it perfectly clear that unless something fundamentally different were done, the present unequal relationship between the Euro-Americans and the Afro-Asians would continue. I have suggested over the past many years that luxury consumption, modern level consumption, must stop in my country, at least temporarily. I shall not bring in concepts of socialism or social justice, although that is near my heart as it should be yours, in spite of the fact that I very well know that the word socialism is not particularly liked by your country. I doubt that very much, because whenever I talk to individual Americans, they didn't seem to be particularly badly disposed towards this word. The personal expenditures of bureaucrats as well as profit-making capitalists in my country should be limited to around $200 a month, which appears to, according to you, to be a very small figure, but in the Indian context or the Asian context is not so small. For with that sum, the bureaucrats and capitalists would be able to live in comfort, although not in modern expensive luxury. And I am stating this prescription not for all times to come, for the next 20 or 30 years until we have been able to expand our industrial and agricultural production, until we have brought our productive equipment up to date, I would like this limit to be imposed on personal expenditure. May I make it doubly clear that whatever is saved through this limitation, I do not suggest should be distributed among the poor, the agriculturists or the working classes. I ask for its investment in agriculture and industry, not for distribution as wages among the poor or the working classes. According to my calculation, this would amount to about $5 billion a year. The government has so far refused to answer my contentions. Presumably the Prime Minister has found to his cost that any kind of a debate with me on these issues would be rather harmful to him, his party and his reputation, and therefore he just keeps quiet whenever I make such statements. $5 billion according to me. But if the worst notes of government calculation were taken into account, it couldn't be less than $2.5 billion. Billion, that is continental milliard. $5 billion. May I in this connection refer you to the issue of foreign aid, which presumably is one of the subjects on which you engage in conversation with Asian and foreign students. Foreign aid. All kinds of aid should be welcome, and particularly aid in expanding the economic equipment of one's country. I am not a government man, and therefore, if anything that I say annoys anybody, please understand that I have nothing to do with the government of India, which I dislike as much as I dislike any other government. Or even more so, because I don't have to deal personally with your government while I have to deal in a personal way with my own government. The aid that goes out from the US or Soviet Russia to undeveloped lands has to be set against a background of what these countries need. Secondly, against the background of what those who give the aid spend in armaments and such like. Also, against its possible uses by the country that receives it. I might straight away assert that this aid is not always used very profitably. It is to a very large extent used in buttressing a somewhat corrupt government. A corrupt pseudo-leftist government, a government that talks socialism and acts a feudal kind of capitalism. And in this, the government of India, as also other Asian governments, are encouraged somewhat by American thinking. For your universities, your foundations, whether the Rockefeller or the Ford or any other foundation, encourage thinking along lines of modernization. And what do they understand by modernization? They think that if a class of people are raised in India who learn to live according to the standards of Euro-America, that would mean development and modernization. So that an American, when he finds some Indian living according to American standards or somewhere near it, very pleased. And I sometimes suspect that just as the Soviets have their allies among India's and Asia's communists, what shall I say, American administrators, because I shall not talk about the American people, and I will not make that mistake of confusing American administrators with the American people. American administrators are pleased when they find an upper crust of middle classes imbibing ideas of modern living, with the result that in that bog of enormous poverty, little islands of luxury are built up. And what else would it lead to except graft and corruption on a colossal scale? You're sometimes surprised at the amount of graft there is in Asian countries, but there is the background to this graft. Even the most honest of person has got to be corrupt in a broad manner of speaking, because of this vast contrast between 4 cents a day. And shall I now tell you how much India's greatest capitalist earns a day and India's greatest bureaucrat? Bureaucrat in the sense of a floating bureaucrat, not necessarily a permanent bureaucrat. 300,000, that comes to about say $70,000 a day. $70,000 a day, that is the earning of India's chief business family. And the expenditure per day of India's chief bureaucrat used to be $5,000 a day. It has probably increased after President Kennedy's assassination. Therefore, unless we learn to distinguish between modernization of consumption and modernization of production, this state of graft and poverty would continue, and foreign aid would not be used satisfactorily. Apart from this, I would like to draw your attention to this vital fact that the world spends about $200 billion a year on armaments. And the total foreign aid that you or the Russians or all else put together give to undeveloped countries is probably less than $10 billion. Not even 5% of what you spend on your armaments. And the two have to be brought into some relation. It's a subject on which I would have liked to speak at some length. At the moment, I must content myself with this, that before 1945, weapons were considered morally worthless or undesirable by all great men such as Jesus and Gandhi. Since 1945, they have become politically useless. When I talk of weapons, I don't mean rifles and ordinary tanks used in the Korean or the Indochina war. I mean the system of missiles and such like which Russia and America alone possess. They are not being used. They will not be used unless the world decides to blow itself up. So that in the next 25 or 30 years, either this system of missiles and weapons will have to be given up, or the world as we know it will blow itself up. There is no third alternative. Because after 1945, the political futility or uselessness of weapons has come to the foreground. The American and the Russian people, the ordinary citizen, will someday revolt. I hope the sooner he revolts the better, but I mean someday revolt against this stockpiling of weapons that are not being used. I am not bringing in any moral ideas. I am not condemning weapons. I am merely stating this political fact, that these weapons are not being used and shall not be used. And how long can a people go on tolerating the production of useless, futile things? And if that happens, you'll be faced with this question, what comes instead? For undoubtedly, weapons have been necessary to mankind, both for practicing tyranny and for fighting against it. Unless we are able to devise some other mode of human action, the alternative that I put before you would then amount to an inescapable tragedy. And what is that alternative? What is that other mode of human action? I believe it is civil disobedience, the 7 revolutions. I don't have time to go into all the 7 revolutions. Let me say equality between man and woman. You think you have achieved it, but I believe you haven't. Equality between man and woman, equality of color, equality of an economic character, not alone among the rich and poor. When I say equality, please understand me to mean possible comparative equality and not idealistic equality. Equality between the rich and poor within a country and equality among various countries of the world. There is also that great revolution for privacy or civil rights or human freedom, which Russia does not possess today, which I am more or less certain would be undertaken also by the Russian people at some very near and future, very near date. Now these are the various revolutions which are being undertaken by mankind in various degrees. Here is a program both for the Indian people and the American people. And in this context, if you look at the foreign aid that is being given today and all the controversies that have been raised in that connection, I have just one statement to make, and that is this: don't give at all or give well. It's no use giving in frivolous, and particularly to governments which are so corrupt. But you might as well turn around on me and say, now look, you are asking us to interfere in your internal affairs. That, of course, is a very difficult question to answer. To that, my argument in principle would be this: that for the next 20 or 30 years, the ideal of modernized consumption for at least 2/3 of the human race must be kept in abeyance until production has been brought up to date. And I would tell those technicians and engineers from my country as well as other parts of Asia who have come out to America to study here, to think of that aspect, and not to compare their salaries or their wages with those of bureaucrats. Let the bureaucrats go to hell, I'll visit you in frighten them out, but let the technicians and the engineers understand the total Indian situation. There are a number of other issues which have merited your attention. So the usual issue of Kashmir and Pakistan. It also shows how dark thoughts can exist in the mind everywhere, in the U.S. as well as in India. We have many dark thoughts. We are not introspective at all. We do not realize what offenses we are guilty of. For, let me state at the very outset that I consider both governments of India and Pakistan guilty in respect of their relationship. One may be less guilty than the other. That is another matter. But both are guilty. And the problems which were expected to be solved as a result of partition of India into India and Pakistan have worsened. There has been no solution to them, not even to the problem of Hindu-Muslim relationships. It was thought that with the partition of India, at least Hindus and Muslims would live in peace. What has happened is transference of an internal situation over the situation of the two countries. And in fact, even the internal situation is continually tragic. For Hindus and Muslims, sometimes erupt into riotous relationships both in India and in Pakistan. Therefore, I believe that this problem must now be considered in a broader perspective. And the effort of India or Pakistan or the United States of America, for the United States of America has lots of power, economic power and military power. And those who have power like to solve all problems in the world. I would suggest that these three countries take up the problem of India and Pakistan, not piecemeal, but in a whole way. And I would not be prepared, I would not obstruct any solution of the issue of Kashmir, provided it is set within a framework of Indo-Pak Confederation. I've deliberately used the word confederation, although it's a medieval word. I mean, after all, there isn't much difference between confederation and federation, but federation probably would annoy the Pakistanis, whereas confederation might not. Within some kind of a reunion of India and Pakistan, the problem of Kashmir can be set and solved. Whether Kashmir goes to Pakistan or stays with India or becomes a separate entity, but within the framework of that confederation is a matter of very little consequence to me. And I guess that if this kind of a solution were put forward before the Indian people, they might also accept it. Although sometimes I do meet with very stupid kind of an opposition when I make such suggestions in Parliament or outside. And may I recommend to President Johnson to take this question up in a broad way when he deals with it next, and not to take it up piecemeal. While I talked of foreign aid, I forgot to make another recommendation to President Johnson. I'm very free with my recommendations, please forgive me. For a politician who has not been successful tends to become somewhat Afro-Asian solidarity. That's a concept which has attracted the emotional fancy of quite a few of us. I don't think there is much in it. There ought not to be. For while the Afro-Asians are suffering from a common set of problems, I'll merely outline a few. The Indian laborer produces in 1 hour what the American laborer does in 3 minutes. That is the inequality of tools. That applies also to most Asian and African laborers. The Indian in most parts of India lives with a density of 350 or 600 or 1,000 persons to the square mile. Whereas Australia, California also, Siberia, the density is about 1 to 5 or 6 persons to the square mile. And there has always been an unjust relationship between the price of primary produce and manufacture. An injustice which you in your own country try to remove by sustaining farm prices and similar measures. Now there is again something which I would like Prime Minister Khrushchev and President Johnson to worry about. This justice and parity between primary produce and manufacturers, price of manufacturers all over the world. Incidentally, the amount of money taken away by the developed countries of the world through this injustice of prices is a little more than the foreign aid that is given to these various countries. Well, I don't know where to stop, but then I stop here with this simple human belief that although I have tried to free myself intellectually from the Euro-Americans, because I believe their categories of thought to be limited, local, and temporary, I have tried to achieve some universal categories of thought. I am not emotionally hostile to them. I have tried all my life, not tried, it has come to me in a natural way, and I don't see where an American is different from an Indian or a Chinese also. Chinese also. Although it does take me a little effort to have to talk to the Chinese, still, the individual is the individual. I believe my Chinese friends are still there, and as an individual, I think the American is as good as any other. There is probably no better human being on earth than the individual American. That is your collectivity. You are as horrid as any of us, probably worse, and if you could do something about it, nobody would be happier than I. So we could bring together, combat these illusory Afro-Asian phrases in a joint way. Thank you.
We have an additional 20 to 25 minutes for questioning. Dr. Lohiya, would you care to come forward and just handle the questions as they come from the floor?
Yes, sir, there, again. For the caste situation. It's good that the subject crops up almost always and as a first subject. I have come to believe that caste is about the greatest single factor in our degradation. Over the past 1,000 years, we have been split up into, broadly speaking, the manual classes, hand-laboring classes, and the intellectual classes. About 90% of the population is belongs, according to my view, to the backward caste in my country. Among them I include women, all women, even those that belong to the higher caste. For women have over the past 1,000 years been denied public opportunities. Again, I make a digression to say that although you might think that you are offered opportunities in your country, but American women are in similar manner, that is not legally, in point of fact, denied opportunities of a public character, except of course for say examples. Now this 90% of the population, which over the past 1,000 years has been carrying on occupations such as those of the agriculturist, the laborer, the barber, the washerman, and so on and so forth, has almost suffered a paralysis of the mind. strong words to use, but there they are. A process of social selection has been taking place in my country. With the result that even the remaining 10% of the population, which belongs to the male higher caste, is not all of it able. Another 9% becomes disabled. Although socially it has not been oppressed through the centuries, but in actual point of fact, it's not able to make use of opportunities that are made available. So that this principle of equal opportunity, which the French or the American or the Russian Revolution has opened out to my countrymen, is not of much use. For what we need in our country is a preferential opportunity for this 90% of the population. Those who have suffered mental disability over the past 1,000 years, who have, so to say, to be supported by crutches for the time being. If we could give them preferential opportunity over a period of, let us say, 10 or 20 or 30 or maybe 40 years, this vast reservoir of ability would then be open to the Indian nation. Today it is not. You accepted this principle of preferential opportunity for reasons such as was in evidence with the Tennessee Valley Authority. If the principle of preferential opportunity is available for development of backward regions, it should be similarly available for development of backward groups and castes. There are, of course, other aspects to it. I would content myself with this final remark that the Indian situation is stable, exceedingly stable, degradingly stable. There is such hankering for stability in my land that I sometimes feel, could we not destroy everything that exists in that country? And one of the main reasons for this stability is the caste system. The earlier it goes, the better, but it's very difficult to abolish because over 1,000 years have gone towards making it as rigid as it is today. But do not believe that that has been always so in our history. So I might conclude by reciting to you a definition by one of my ancestors, given about 2,500 years ago, Samana Prasavaha Jati. All those who can produce children of one another belong to the same caste. A definition than which not even a modern Huxley has produced anything better. No, please forgive me. I would be unjust. There was another gentleman who had raised his hand before you did. Oh, there's several. No, there, no. I suppose. Have you? Yes. They have adopted the American of modernization of consumption before they have been able to modernize production. The U.S. or other European lands have striven for nearly 200 years or more to achieve their present productive equipment and machinery. I give you a rather grossly oversimplified illustration. You have your jets. It took you a long number of years to arrive at those jets, to produce them. Jets and other aircraft. We don't produce them, but we make use of them. But please don't misunderstand me to mean that I do not wish to make use of jets. I have, for instance, in my own country, given illustrations from the sphere of cosmetics. My countrywomen, and as one grows in age, one begins to like one's countrywomen, are charming, beautiful, and they have that practice of putting, what do you call it, that black little thing in their eyes, kajal, coliseum I think is the English word for it, which cost them nothing more than maybe 1/10 of a cent or 1/5 of a cent. And poets have likened eyes to daggers, but Indian women know how to point their daggers still further by putting their kajal into their eyes, which cost them just about 1/5 of a cent. But in imitation of American princesses and queens, they set out sometimes to achieve a better situation by cosmetics, modern cosmetics. All kinds of things. I suppose a modern cosmetics would cost a woman, if well handled, at least how much? Anyhow, I've made out my case. Now, if a bureaucrat gets a salary of let us say, $400 a month, you cannot expect his wife and his sister and sister-in-law to use modern cosmetics. But we have got to do it because that is modern living. So where else is all that to come from except God? So primarily you, ladies and gentlemen, are responsible for the corruption in the Asian and African situation. Yes. But then how am I to... Now look, yes, I give preferential opportunity to the lady there. You're perfectly correct, although I would warn you against monistic solutions. It may be all right in philosophy or religion to seek after a single principle. But in social affairs and in politics, it is always good to mingle your principles. So let's have the village and the city together, educational progress and all other progress together. As far as possible, undertake activity on as many fronts as possible. Pluralistic solution, not monistic. Yes, sir. Now, how shall I? This gentleman, these two, yes, sir. Now, may I ask you, yes, with the dark glasses? Yes, in India. Yeah, when I talk of a revolution, I thank you very much for this opportunity that you give me to state very clearly and categorically that I am opposed to violence. I should like to state both nationally and internationally, but today I haven't the courage to do so. Therefore, I confine myself to stating that I am opposed to the use of violence in internal affairs. Therefore, I foresee a revolution that will be primarily, or that will be non-violent in character. That is why I use the word civil disobedience, without weapons, without arms. Even that is very difficult to achieve. The Indian people have become half dead, or three-quarters dead. They are dormant. Caste has done that. Other factors have done it. Nevertheless, there is just a little possibility that they might erupt into instability, disobedience, direct action. Well, it might happen in the next week or two, or it might not happen another 10 years. Yes. I would like you to make a distinction between revolutions against foreign domination and those against native tyranny. We had revolted against British rule. We have revolted in our history, not very often, but sometimes against foreign rule. But in the past 1,000 years or so, we have never revolted against the internal native tyrant. And that is precisely what I would like to happen. Because I believe there is an inverse relationship between revolts against the native tyrant and successful obstruction to foreign conquest. Only that people can successfully obstruct or resist foreign conquest which knows how to revolt against the native tyrant. And this kind of a revolt against native tyranny, I hope for, will take place in the very near future. Again, I would like to say both electorally and in a direct action way. Yes, please. I justify the invasion of Goa as such, but not when it took place. That is, invasion of Goa is a bad word to use. After all, why should I hold the brief for my government? This government is utterly stupid. But then, forget the invasion of Goa. The point is that Goa needed to be integrated with the rest of India. Goa is not even an extension of India. It's a part of India within the bosom of India, and anyone who speaks up for the separate entity of Goa will have to ask for a revisit of the British to India. And I cannot understand Mr. Stevenson talking about Goa in the fashion that he does. He just does not understand a bit of colonialism or imperialism. But I should like to state this, that I still have my opposition to India's Prime Minister in the selection of the time when he undertook this invasion. And that is for internal reasons. Our general elections were due. 6 weeks before the general elections, he ordered this invasion of Goa or integration of Goa, so that it was perfectly clearly an attempt to blackmail the Indian people into voting for him. He gave this gift to the Indian people, and that is what shocked me. And therefore, with regard to your question, the invasion of Goa or the integration of Goa with the rest of India, if you raise another question of non-violence, may I point out it's not good to mix up violence with non-violence. Anyone who says that the Indian government should not use its armies must make it clear that India, as the country of Mahatma Gandhi, must disband her armies. There must be unilateral disarmament, even though other countries may not undertake disarmament. Once the armies are there, if you want them to be used against the Chinese invasion, surely they will be used also against an imperialism, such as the Portuguese imperialism, which was undertaking all kinds of heinous acts. So there you have my position. Not the timing, most undesirable, a crooked thing to do, but politicians are generally very crooked, you know. Very crooked. Anyhow, there was another... Plebiscite, yes, plebiscite. Well, I would like the India government to answer that question. As far as I am concerned, I have given you my answer. I do not believe that a solution to the problem of Kashmir on lines of plebiscite or any other would be satisfactory. That would be a piecemeal solution. But I would be prepared to accept any solution for Kashmir provided it were set within a framework of Indo-Pakistan reunion of whatever elementary kind. Most inadequate. After all, you cannot untie the knots of history totally. You can do so only up to a point. And you cannot concede this principle of self-determination to all areas, to villages, to districts. Furthermore, Kashmir has become a very serious issue, I grant, to the people on both sides of the frontier. If a solution of Kashmir were undertaken in a piecemeal manner, it might, for the time being, settle that one specific question of Kashmir, but it will worsen the Indo-Pakistan relationship, from which I extract just one little item. There are as many as 50 million Muslims in India and around 9 to 10 million Hindus in Pakistan. From time to time, internal disturbances take place on a very big scale in both areas. I should state here that there is some little difference between India and Pakistan in this matter, but let that be. Now, any piecemeal solutions would most inevitably worsen such situations. Have I made myself clear? But then there that gentleman has been raising his hand. Yes? Now look, I have accepted a philosophy of despair. I cannot say. All I can say is this, that no matter that my way of thinking may not become the government in my lifetime, I'll persist in it. That is all I can say. There is a very small possibility that we might become the government in the next 5 or 10 years. A very small possibility. It may happen sooner. For miracles take place in politics, and particularly in the kind of politics that are there in my country. Well, you know, a certain rapidity in development is indicated because of various extraneous factors. My Prime Minister is ill. The Congress Party and its various sections are intriguing for supremacy. The people, or such sections of them as don't like the Congress Party, are also wanting to have a consolidated opposition. All these trends are there. But then I would not be entitled, logically, to conclude that we are near authority. Logically, I would once again repeat, you see, a man like me is in a very delicate situation. I have long enjoyed popularity without authority. You know what that means? That is also a source of corruption. Corruption of a very basic kind. And there are many others like me. If we do get an opportunity to use authority, well, we'll be happy, but then I'm more or less used to this situation of popularity with authority, although I would like to reverse it. And short of a miracle, I do not see any logical possibility of an immediate change. But again, miracles. Yes, please. That gentleman at the back has been raising his hand. Then I'll come. Beg your pardon? Role in the United Nations. That rips open the whole question of India's foreign policy. I don't think India has had any policy, whether internal or external. And her role in the United Nations has not been creative at all. I would want India to take up creative, independent positions. Now I'll give two illustrations. With regard to recognition of China, I would have expected my government to want to recognize both Chinas. I'm now talking of 1949. Both Chinas. Peking China as well as Taipei China. I know that such a solution would have been disagreeable to both. And the India government would probably have had to sever connections with both. Neither would have agreed with it. But if the India government had put forward this solution of a recognition of both governments in 1949, the mind of the world would have worked on it, and probably something would have come out of it. I might also suggest that much of the Asian mind has gone wrong precisely because of India not having made this distinction clear. In recognizing Peking China, I suspect that my Prime Minister wanted to give himself the aura of revolutionary integrity by borrowing it. There is a certain type of Asian and African, also Englishmen, particularly, Oxford and Cambridge are beautiful universities in regard to this. They teach you the art of practicing revolution in the spheres of foreign policy without having to practice it at home.